about gender and migrant labor in the time of COVID-19 using two different international cases. The first case is that of rampant COVID-19 infections among South Asian and Southeast Asian immigrant populations working in Persian Gulf states and in Singapore. I draw on both geographic locations because of the crowded living conditions, high rates of infection, and origins of their foreign workers. All these are similar. The second case is that of a highly diverse immigrant and refugee population disproportionately ill with COVID-19 that's working in the United States in the meatpacking industry. So this morning, I'm going to make 3 points. First, globally, we are seeing a trend of alarmingly high infection rates among immigrant populations in host countries. The immigrants are typically working in low-paying jobs and living and/or working in crowded conditions. These COVID infection outbreaks, second, are gendered. In the case of the migrants in the Persian Gulf and Singapore, these laborers are nearly all men. In the case of US meatpacking, immigrant laborers are a noticeably mixed gender group, unlike many other industries in the country. And third, the effects of the threat of infection, of illness, and perhaps death are also gendered. That is, COVID-19 infection sweeping through international immigrant populations has gendered knock-on effects. So let me run through each case in turn, followed by a brief discussion of direct and indirect gendered impacts of COVID-19 for these populations. So to begin with the Persian Gulf and Singapore. Singapore, a city-state of 6 million people, houses a large proportion of its 1 million foreign workers in overcrowded dormitories. Men from India, Bangladesh, and Nepal live and sleep, in fact, spend most of their time that they are not working, packed in close quarters with little storage for personal belongings, sleeping racks from 12 to 20 bunks per room. Wash facilities are inadequate. Reports from Singapore indicate that in some housing, 100 men share only 5 showers and 5 toilets. Even under the best of circumstances, these accommodations are inadequate. And under COVID-19, they are the perfect storm of a crowded population under lockdown, unable to socially distance, practice safe sanitation, or seek medical care. Over the last 24 hours, 632 new cases were reported, and all but 5 were among the migrant labor population. These workers are deemed essential, nevertheless, they are on lockdown, creating fear of disease spreading among them and panic that they are unable to leave the premises. Options for self-protection are few, compounded by the fact that Singapore has no minimum wage for foreign workers, which means that they cannot afford to live outside the compounds. The government has extended the lockdown until June 1st, increasing fears of lost wages, as well as panic over the possibility of infection or death. Singapore is unable to test all foreign workers, so it is seeking to isolate those who test positive and has built 10,000 beds in order to separate the ill laborers from the healthy, with plans for more beds. As foreign workers already do not mix with the rest of the population, they are not likely to spread the disease to citizens, only among their own ranks. The new beds will isolate them from other foreign workers and hopefully spread the flow of COVID-19, but it will also isolate them from their support networks and trusted sources of information. In Persian Gulf states, there are an estimated 35 million low-skilled, mostly male workers from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, working primarily in construction and other low-wage jobs like cleaners or drivers. They are disproportionately infected compared to the local population, and in some states, governments report that only foreign workers are infected. These men live in crowded labor camps separated from the rest of the population. Sanitation in these camps is very basic and in some cases substandard. As COVID-19 spreads through the foreign worker population, these men are losing their jobs, forced to accept lower pay and unpaid leave, running out of money, unable to return home, and occasionally deported even when they want to stay. As many are deemed essential workers, those who remain employed face possible infection at job sites or on transportation. For others, labor camps are under lockdown. This means that men cannot leave to work or to socially distance or to return to their countries of origin. Gulf states have pledged to find safer housing for these men, and others like Qatar have promised to rectify hygiene conditions, like poor access to running water. States have also promised widespread testing, but many immigrants with expired papers are afraid to get tested lest they be deported for working illegally. While host states have pledged amnesty for illegal workers to encourage testing, many are still afraid, given the investment that they have made to be in the host country and the need to support families in the home country. As you no doubt know, India has just announced plans for repatriation for its workers from Gulf states, but that is only the beginning of what these workers and their families will need. To turn to the United States, to date, 200 large meat packing plants in the US have shut down, leading industry analysts and consumers alike to anticipate a collapse in meat supplies. Major infections in South Dakota, Iowa, the Carolinas have captured global attention, and all that negative press has thrown thousands out of work. Meatpacking in the US has historically been an urban industry, with livestock being herded or shipped to cities, fed, slaughtered, packed, and shipped from a central location. Chicago played this historical role, for example. It was a male-dominated industry until women entered meatpacking during the Second World War. And more recently, production has shifted to small towns and rural areas, and the workforce is now a mix of men and women, and predominantly people of color, especially immigrants and refugees. The work in meatpacking plants in the US is notoriously dangerous, both due to workplace accidents and due to repetitive stress injuries. Workplace conditions are crowded both on the shop floor and in break rooms, restrooms, and other places where one would go when not on the assembly line. The ability to maintain safe distance from others is impossible. Although sanitary standards are high for production, many plants lack proper hygiene and sanitizing stations for workers. In a relentless effort to maintain competitiveness and profits, the industry has engaged in labor divisiveness and isolation. By divisiveness, I mean a concerted effort to diversify the workforce such that collective action is stymied. By isolation, I mean the intentional locating of meat processing facilities in rural areas and small towns where workers have few other options for employment. As corporations seek to produce meat faster and in greater quantities, assembly lines, mechanization, and de-skilling is the norm. Historically, as wages and job prestige were lowered, white men left the industry to be replaced by even lower paid women, immigrants, and refugee labor. The diversity of the present day workforce is impressive. In one poultry manufacturing plant, 80 different languages are spoken. All of these efforts by corporations contribute to the gendered character of the COVID-19 outbreak in the US meatpacking industry. That gendered character is of a mixed gender group that is highly contagious, but with no clear gender pattern. In addition to gender, immigrant and refugee status has influenced how these workers respond to plant closings. Immigrants with work visas are afraid to apply for unemployment because of fears they will be considered a financial burden, as President Trump has declared, and become ineligible for permanent residency status. It isn't true that they can't apply for unemployment, but because of the importance of obtaining permanent residency status, most immigrants and refugees are unwilling to take the chance. What is true is that federal coronavirus aid is not available to anyone living in a household with an undocumented immigrant. And that is often the case with this particular population. So although continents apart, these heavily infected, uniquely gendered populations share similarities that put them at high risk. First, they are mostly foreigners, away from their home countries and perhaps their families, and often isolated from information and services. Second, they may be legal or illegal, but either way, their status affects their access to medical care and often government benefits. They are a critical and yet invisible population to those whose lifestyles they support. Third, they're precariously employed, meaning they fear losing their jobs because of the difficulty of finding other work at a living wage with their skill levels, language proficiency, or immigrant status. They're living in a location that has few job opportunities outside of their current position. Fourth, they are currently out of work, and it is not clear whether or not they will be paid by their employers, will receive direct government assistance, or are eligible for unemployment benefits. The gendered knock-on effects of COVID-19 on these populations are, first, many of these workers are sending remittances home. A failure to send money can lead to extreme hardship for wives and mothers in South Asia, Latin America, and Africa who are depending on those cash transfers to make ends meet. Women left behind face increasing vulnerability as remittances dry up. Women bear the brunt of trying to meet the food needs of their families while managing to pay bills such as water, electricity, and school fees. In both cases, workers and their families are at the mercy of employers and governments to tide them over financially while they are out of work. Second, men working and living in COVID-19 hotspots like labor camps endanger their families when they return home at the end of their work visas or if they return early, again putting wives and mothers both at risk, adding to their work burden to care for those who are ill or may get ill. Third, women working in COVID-19 hotspots like meatpacking plants are likely to be performing the double burden of working for wages during the day and performing unpaid labor at home. Their family responsibilities do not fade as they fall ill, and if they are the sole breadwinner in the household, they may minimize their illness in order to continue working, putting themselves at greater risk, and of course, others. And finally, disaster-related gender-based violence is a documented global phenomenon that directly affects women through an uptick of incidences during and after disasters. Women are at additional risk during COVID-19, not only due to documented patterns of increases of gender-based violence, but also because of their added isolation from friends, relatives, and coworkers who provide support, as well as decreased contact with formal in-person medical care should significant injury occur. So to conclude, there is no doubt that COVID-19 is having direct and indirect gendered impacts. And yet, as a feminist, I cannot help but think that much more attention is needed to the gender dynamics of immigration, infection, employment, and ability to cope. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. It was very insightful. I can open the discussion for 2-3 minutes if you have the participants have anything to ask Kathleen as she has to quit. One question that we got from the chat is about, Kathleen, to you, was that will the pandemic force the governments to rethink the inhuman conditions in which they exploit the migrant laborers? So this was the question that somebody asked in the chat. You want to respond to that? And in the meanwhile, some people can raise their hands if they have very pressing question to ask to Kathleen. And we can see. So
shall I go ahead and respond?
Yeah, so you respond to this one and then we'll take one or two if people
Great.
are eager to ask you.
Okay, terrific. So the answer is yes. Of course, we hope that governments will respond, and particularly to labor conditions. And historically, usually after a crisis in health of a working population, then governments do take steps to address these issues. What I think is particularly pressing for the Gulf, for Singapore, for the United States, is to realize that this is how the capitalist system works, and this is how laissez-faire economics works. And that is to use up a disposable labor force. I'm not saying corporations are sitting around and thinking of their labor forces in that way, but they are clearly not taking care of them. If corporations are not going to do that, then governments are going to have to step in to play that role. Here in the United States, the government is taking an opposite approach to regulating labor and labor conditions. Post-COVID, they are probably going to have to change.
Yeah. Okay, are there any questions? Do you want to unmute participants if they have one or two more questions to ask Kathleen?
I actually don't have the participant screen up.
I'm asking the hosts here.
Sure. And I do see some questions in the chat.
Yeah, so there is on the unpaid work and violence in households. And apparently financially comfortable is also a big concern. So what steps being suggested?
Yeah, okay. So to take so the impact of COVID on unpaid care work, I mean, that has just exploded at a global scale. I mean, all that kind of work that women do unpaid to care for the sick is also being transferred into more work, taking care that those they care for don't get sick. So I would say that unpaid care work has increased exponentially.
Yeah. So one question we can just take and then we move on to other panelists. This is regarding the behavior change communication to be tailored towards women, migrants, and other vulnerable communities during COVID.
Well, I think this is very tricky because we don't want to disempower them by messaging people who don't have access to adequate wash that they should be doing a better job. That is not the message that we want to send to people. I think those facilities need to be there and the messaging can come. But I think in the case of poor and migrant populations, it's quite difficult to send the message that people should be engaging in better hygiene practices when they don't have the means to do so.
Great. Kathleen, thanks so much. My request to participants is that we are going to open the floor later after all the discussions are over. So there will be certain questions which will be applicable for other panelists also. So we move on to our next speaker. Thanks, Kathleen, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So much. Thank you so much. So our another second speaker is Madhu Krishna, who is Deputy Director at BMGF India. She leads WASH portfolio, as we all know, in India. And she has more than 25 years of experience of working in the sector on program design, evaluation, policy, and advocacy across initiatives of water sanitation, public health, agriculture, livelihood, and women's empowerment. So I request Madhu to speak, and she's going to speak on roadmap to mitigate gender-based vulnerabilities in urban WASH. Welcome, Madhu. Please join us.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you can see me. This is a very, very important topic. And as with everything, whether it's our public health infrastructure or WASH, COVID has brought to light so many of the gaps that we continue to see. But one of the biggest ones is how lack of sanitation and lack of a gendered approach to sanitation has manifoldly more impacted women. So let me start with that. We already know that a lack of safe sanitation disproportionately affects millions of women and girls around the world. They pay a huge physical and mental cost when it comes to this lack of sanitation. So these ubiquitous inequalities have been, very magnified during COVID, both from a care load burden to basically less or no social or economic protection, and also a lack of anybody thinking about their needs for essential feminine hygiene products, sanitary pads, etc. So whether it is about migrant workers or urban slum populations or rural populations, all of these inequities have played a big part in COVID. And so I think urban wash services for us is an important entry point to understand what that means and how we can mitigate some of this gender-based vulnerability, not only during pandemics, but overall. So let's see how COVID has actually heightened this gender-based vulnerability in urban wash. Women are very disproportionately represented in informal, poorly paid jobs without benefits. Most of you know, if you're from India, about how the labor force participation rate for women has been declining severely and causing a lot of concern. So beyond domestic work, street vendors, in the wash sector, women also make up more than 50% of urban sanitation workers, but as informal workers and as contracted workers. They continue to work on the front lines during the pandemic outside of the formal fold, so they have very little recourse to any health safety nets, insurance, or any access to already overflowing public health facilities. So this was a big challenge for them, and of course women again were disproportionately affected because of the lack of enough public health facilities which they could use while they were on the front lines. Nobody paid attention to their need for protection. And in fact, there was more stigma because they were doing the work that they honestly were trying to do, is to keep our streets and our toilets clean, but with no protection. They also then, on the midst of all this, shouldered a skewed burden of care responsibilities. So now they also had children at home who they had to worry about. They were out of school. They have elderly who they have to worry about because the increasing risk of infection. And also additional wash chores, meaning additional water is needed, additional work is needed at home. So they are more exposed and unable to preserve the precautions they needed because they're also forced to collect water often from common water collection points, especially in the poor and urban informal settlements, because there's not enough infrastructure there. And during the pandemic, there was obviously an increased crowding and pressure on community toilets and public toilets in these informal settlements. And they are very under-provisioned to begin with. So they are left even more at risk because of high risk of transmission of disease. The shortage of course, lack of menstrual hygiene provision during the times of crisis, we all know can cause a huge risk for girls and women. There was a headline also that periods don't stop during a pandemic, but nobody took that into account because all of the planning is not done with any kind of gendered lens. So even when we're doing a crisis response, there's nobody thinking about, okay, but how does this severely impact women? And so this really brings to the core the issue around very exclusive nature of city planning that we have seen the whole world plagued with. And what COVID-19 has done is only further exacerbate these kinds of inequalities. So how do we mitigate some of this gender-based vulnerability during the pandemic? So we have to think of both short-term and medium-term solutions. In the short term, in urban informal settlements, these kind of measures that I'm outlining now can be taken immediately. That is that you need to provide additional provisions for hand washing and community toilets, use of temporary mobile units, portable units, when we can set up, temporary cities for melas and religious gatherings where we provision all of this. Why can't we do it now? Because this is a pandemic, and urban local bodies need to put extra portable toilets to enable women to be able to go there more often. They have more needs. They need to be longer in the toilet. They're also taking care of children. And just leaving them with whatever is the infrastructure available and not worrying about it causes a lot of distress. There should also obviously be the innovative wash products, and this is across genders, that reduce the need for contact. So really cheap tippy tap kind of solutions should be put in that are foot operated, both for water, etc. Additional water tankers, etc., should be made available, especially in the urban informal settlements, because women have a hard time standing in line collecting the additional water that they need, even if they have an individual toilet. Often there are no separate water connections, so they are kind of shared water connections. Those need to be augmented with additional water supplies. The other really important, because we've seen the amount of data that's coming out on the increase in domestic violence, but by simply having a helpline doesn't really help the women, because they still have to stay in the house with the kind of abuser that they have. So can we quickly organize some response teams from local community groups, special task forces, which can do some relief and response and mitigation measures? So if there is a complaint, at least the person who's abusing knows that there's somebody watching and they have to desist from this. If you simply call a passive helpline, that doesn't help, because there's no consequence for the abuser, but in fact there's a double consequence on the woman who's complained. So I think this is a very important, actually, it needs to be put in place. Some kind of task force which is coordinated through a community group, a CBO, some police station needs to be there, so that the abusers know that there will be consequences for their action. Absolutely, there should be provision of menstrual hygiene products, along with ration shops. Wherever people are going to community, you need to ensure that there is adequate provision of sanitary napkins, disposable napkins for the women who need them. There should also be a need to set up some sort of creche which is well managed, with the children kept at a distance, because women have such an added burden of childcare, additional responsibilities at home, and it's very hard in very small rooms to keep your children inside, yourself inside, protect your seniors. So if during the day they have a place where they can safely leave the children and childcare, they can take care of the additional burden. And then there can be some payment also to some of the community women who are managing that. They can do that on a rotation. There absolutely needs to be, and we are happy that the urban local bodies are taking care of some of the sanitation workers, but a special emphasis on the informal female sanitation workers to ensure provision of adequate personal protective equipment. It doesn't need to be as as scientifically made as that for health workers, because we know there is a shortage, but at least give them nitrile rubber gloves so that they don't touch surfaces that they shouldn't, and also give them some sort of mask and protective garments over their garments. So these are some of the very important immediate steps that can be taken. However, one of the more important things that we also need to see is what can we actually take away from COVID, and how to to fill the gaps of these deep-seated inequities that persist in our cities, especially as they relate to urban poor and more specifically women. In the medium and long term, we need to use this moment in history to push the case for more inclusive planning and service delivery. Women have to be at the center of planning for infrastructure and service delivery. They need to be a part of the decision-making, resource allocation, in order to truly provide for this half of the population that always gets left out when any of this is happening. Even now, we know when COVID cases are reported, there is no gender disaggregation. We have been pressing on this for a long time, that we need gender disaggregated data. If you don't know what you're impacting, if you don't measure it even from the get-go, how will you be able to address what the problems are? So even today, there is no clear gender disaggregated case on how women are being impacted, except in some select states, and it's very fragmented. And this is true not only in India, but around the world. It is very, very hard for us to figure out how women are being impacted specifically by COVID. For Urban WASH, the principles that the foundation really stands by are what we call citywide inclusive sanitation, CWISE principles. They provide us a very good starting point. They give us a framework to think on, to work with city, state, and national governments, because we really do want an equitable urban sanitation, equitable sanitation service delivery, regardless of their gender or income. And we know that planning never takes into account the needs of the urban poor, and definitely not for women. They highlight very key actionable measures, such as highlighting the importance of individual household toilets as much as possible. And again, in the COVID, we know that the use of community toilets, overcrowded public toilets, poses a huge risk for disease transmission. So we should really push cities to not just default to community toilets as ensuring access to the urban poor. As much as possible, we need to make sure that individuals or groups of individual households have a toilet that they can take care of, that they can ensure that there is less mixing of populations, and then also you can manage the human waste. It has a huge potential, COVID, to further harm women's health, rights, and freedoms, both in the long term, from a social and economic standpoint, again, because they're not counted separately. So it's a household, how it's affecting everyone. It's not taking into account any of the needs, special needs that I've highlighted. So it really does behove us as a community to act quickly and make sure that we understand what the gendered differences are on the impact of COVID. I don't think it's going to be easy for us to manage a lot of this, but I think it's very important that we never lose sight of the ways in which we can address some of these gender inequalities. I have a quote from our co-chair, which I love to say over and over again. We cannot use the complexity of resolving gender inequality as an excuse for failing to think and act more intentionally about putting women and girls at the center of what we do. We understand it's complex. We understand that there are millions of challenges as we're doing it, but let's not forget to address the needs of half of our population. Once we do that, we only further push women into more marginalized situations than they already are. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. This was very insightful. Madhu focused on how to engage women and how to keep women in the center of planning as well as in delivery of programs, and stressed upon the city, the role of the city governance institutions as well as the community-based organizations to come during this time and help women. So not only the helplines help, but it is also the human interaction and the community-based organizations where they find more solace and comfort. They could be important actors in reducing a lot of grief during this time, and reducing a lot of tension and problems associated with the pandemics that come onto the women. Thanks very much, Madhu. Now we move on to our another speaker, who is Sujoy Majumdar. Most of us know him. He's a WASH specialist at UNICEF. Sujoy has worked on this sector for very long in various capacities with the state government and with the national government. So I would invite Sujoy to come and speak on the impact of COVID on WASH in rural India with the focus on women and adolescent girls. So over to you, Sujoy.
Yeah, thank you, Anju. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible and visible too.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'd like to have a small presentation if it's okay, and if you allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks to you and CPR for inviting me to speak today. And I thank both my speakers, Kathleen and Madhu. So I think they were quite elaborate in the way they basically outlined the issues that have arisen because of the COVID pandemic and its impact on women. And many of the things they said is equally true, and you'll see a bit of that in the slides. I'll not focus on those issues which has already been discussed much. I'll skip through them. But you had asked me to speak on the impact of what we in UNICEF has seen, or the impact of COVID, especially on WASH, with a special focus in rural areas. Um, this is a quote which I found while looking through documents on this issue. Sheryl Sandberg, who is the CEO of Facebook, has recently said in an interview, as you can see, I'm not going to read it out, but what she has, I think she has explained very well why women are the most affected in any kind of pandemic, and especially in the pandemic that we are facing now. They do the majority of the work. They earn a very small fraction of the income. They hold very low percentage of the world's property. They have the least access to resources. And therefore, because of the isolation also, as Madhu said, they are victims of violence. And therefore, this is what needs to be the front and center of the world's response. Similarly, one second, I'm trying. Yeah, I'll just go back. One sec. So in India, we have seen the National Commission of Women have reported a twofold increase in gender-based violence. There has been a threefold rise in police apathy towards women's complaints because the police are busy with other activities in the pandemic lockdown. Childline India in the last week of March, between the 20th and 31st of March, had received 92,000 calls asking for protection. And I think most of this would have been urban areas. In rurals, this would have really been non-recommended and not documented. And as Madhu mentioned, trapped children, which is a very, I mean, which is area of concern for UNICEF, and many of my colleagues are working on this, are trapped with abusers at home. And I saw in the chat box people asking questions about alcohol, both alcohol consumption and alcohol deprivation has resulted in a large number of cases in which abuse is happening across communities, and this is a matter of serious concern. I'd like the slideshow is a bit. Yes, sorry for that. I'm trying to. Yeah. Now I'm trying to look at what are the basic areas that are impacted. The first one I could make out was education, where we are seeing because of the closure of schools, both boys and girls are out of school, and there is a great concern that the final dropout rates when schools reopen will disproportionately impact adolescent girls. And it is being, I mean, the real concern is that we will not see all the girls coming back to school again. And that is something we really need to look at. The gaps in education and access is leading and will lead to increased risk of exploitation and various other health impacts like early and unintended pregnancies, child and early and forced marriage. UNICEF has a wing of child protection, and my colleagues are working on this issue. And what I hear from them is a matter of real concern. And we are seeing households and fathers and mothers saying that even when this reopens, the priority of going back to school will be with the boy child and not with the girl child. Regarding health services, Madhu and Kathleen has already spoken on this. Reduced access. So because most of the hospital facilities are now trying to treat only COVID, and the decreased access to health facilities has, has been a huge issue for many girls and young women. Sexual and reproductive health services are stopped. There is increased burden for pregnant women because they have to deliver majorly at home. We are getting initial figure, which is unconfirmed, but anecdotal evidence is saying is infant mortality after childbirth is rising. Decreased maternal and newborn health services is a problem. Protective structures in the health sphere are getting disrupted, and families and communities are placed under stress by health burdens, economic burdens, which affect disproportionately girls and women. And, and the psychological distress in terms of crisis is becoming a major issue. Gender-based violence, as we mentioned, quarantine measures are putting girls and women at heightened risk of violence at home. Social distancing is putting children into isolation and making them more at risk. Economic stress I've mentioned, and going forward, we're really concerned about the fact that it puts maybe girls at greater risk of exploitation, child labor, and gender-based violence. And lockdowns also lock down girls' autonomy. We are seeing reports from across the states. So UNICEF is present in 15 of the major states in India, and what we are hearing from our colleagues is that the situation is getting dire across communities, especially where there is economic stress. Child protection, the first one I mentioned, disease outbreaks like this affect, as Madhu mentioned, girls and women's duties of caring at home for siblings, elderly and ill family members, including for COVID. And this is putting huge psychological and social stress on girls and women at home. The economic situation I have mentioned, I'll skip to the next slide. Uh, so under menstrual hygiene, one of the issues I think that came was not realized in the initial weeks, but came up in a big way after that, was simply the availability of sanitary pads and its distribution and disruption in the entire process. The government initially did not keep sanitary pads as a priority item, but I think that has been changed now. But there is a huge issue of availability. I will not speak much on this. I think Arundhati is speaking on menstrual hygiene after me, so I'll let. But what I want to say is that I am seeing this in urban areas. I'm seeing it in my family. My daughter also says that the availability of sanitary pads in medical shops here in New Delhi is also becoming a problem. So it, it's something that is even worse in rural areas. One thing I would like to mention is the issue of water availability and sanitation services in rural areas. Now, as you see, there has been restriction on in the movement outside households, especially in the so-called red zone areas. People are not being allowed to move out of homes, and collecting water has become a huge problem. And it is an issue of uh, daily, collection of water, daily cooking and household, social distancing, the use of increased hand washing, increasing the need for water at homes, making sure that drinking water remains safe to drink. Again, the responsibility falls on women. In sanitation, for people with household latrines, there are social issues which already restricted the use of household latrines by women and girls, especially in extended families. And this, and for people who don't have it at home, as was mentioned by Madhu, it becomes a problem for them to go out in lockdown. One of the things I just wanted to highlight for discussion, I will not go into this much, is that the impact on women frontline workers due to COVID. Nurses, ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, ANMs are majoritarily women. And they are in the forefront, both in medical facilities as well as in homes and rural communities too, in, being the frontline working on COVID with very low support. And I've heard that, so in some states, ASHA workers have been given an additional incentive of 1,000 rupees to work on COVID. But I mean, it is something which, I mean, they can't afford to buy any kind of protectives, equipment for that. So it is a problem that they really have to face. Another issue I wanted to just bring into the discussion was the role of women SHGs and their contribution to the COVID fight. We are seeing good practices, I guess, across the country. Women SHGs working in mass production, sanitation, sanitary pads, hand wash, sanitizers, working in community kitchens, spreading information, but and then financial services. So there is a positive contribution from women SHGs in there. I just want to end with a couple of slides about what UNICEF is doing. It's just a I just picked up 4 or 5 activities we're doing now. We're doing much more, I think, in the States. One is we're carrying an adolescent vulnerability assessment, which is an online assessment which can be accessed through the UNICEF website, trying to see what the vulnerabilities and challenges faced by adolescents, including focusing on adolescent girls and youth in the ongoing COVID lockdown. The other intervention which I thought would be of interest is UNICEF is working with state governments for continued access and consumption of iron folic acid to the community. The third one is supporting states to issue guidelines for continuity of essential health and nutrition services, focusing on nutrition of young children and pregnant mothers and newly mothers. So these are, I mean, trying to help states and plan out how they roll this out, the state level. Uh, uh, Helping states supporting health pregnancies and safe delivery counseling. Then for education, we're trying to work with the Ministry of HRD and with states for continued learning of students using digital and non-digital platforms, focusing on girl students again. That's why I've added it here. Daily tracking systems we put in place in several states. Examples of Bihar, Jharkhand, and Karnataka started for people who have been sent home from institutions. These are basically people who are staying in hostels, tribal hostels and other community hostels, and they had to go back home. And then one of the things that you've seen, and one of the issues we've been trying to help out is the large transit kind of camps where all the migrant people are being put up, and the conditions of children, girl childs, and women and children in general. And trying to see the situation there and to provide help to the government and local administrations to make sure that the child abuse and the help like providing hygiene kits, etc., are provided. As Madhu mentioned, hand washing facilities in urban slums. We are looking at supporting the government in helping them put up hand washing facilities in suitable places across rural areas in the country. So it's an intervention that we are trying to do. So I'll end here. I think if there are any questions later, I'll be happy to answer. Over.
Thank you, Sujoy. You brought very important points here about how women and adolescent girls suffer most. Health-wise as well as psychologically, they suffer a lot. I am seeing some chats where people have asked some questions which we can take later. We move on to Arundhati now. Arundhati Muralidharan is Manager Policy WASH in Health and Nutrition and is also looking WASH in schools at WaterAid India. She has been working on issues of public health for last 15 years. She's herself a doctorate in public health from Boston University. She, in fact, WaterAid India, like what Sujoy also mentioned in his presentation, that has recently done a study during the lockdown period only on the whole supply chain of MHM products. And I'm very glad that she's here to present some of the basic findings that are emerging from the primary research. So over to Arundhati for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Anju, and many thanks to CPR and the SciPi team for inviting us. I'm just going to share. Hopefully, you can see the screen. Andrew, just let me know if you can see this presentation.
Yeah, Arundhati, we are not seeing. Yeah, now we have started seeing your screen. Can you speak louder also? Your voice was
Yes.
little. Yeah.
Yes. So hopefully you can see the screen. So thank you, everyone. So as both Madhu and Sujoy pointed out, menstrual hygiene and menstrual health is an important consideration for girls and women and other menstruators during this time, and a basic kind of biological process that we have not been paying much attention to. We've been thinking a lot about this at Menstrual Health Alliance India, that WaterAid, along with Development Solutions. We've been getting in touch with various grassroots organizations as well as various other actors who have been engaged in menstrual health and hygiene from the beginning of the lockdown period. And we were hearing some rather disturbing stories. We started looking at the various groups that were being affected, groups of women, both the ones that organizations typically work with and new groups that were emerging as highly vulnerable. This got us thinking more and more about what does the lockdown mean for women and girls in terms of their access to essential products as well as access to information. We identified some key groups that we wanted to look into more. One is many organizations work with adolescent girls as well as with adult women, both in low-income urban as well as in rural areas. And what we started hearing from organizations is that a lot of school-going girls, due to government as well as non-government efforts, were getting pads through schools. And with schools abruptly shutting down, their access to these products, completely dependent on school-based distribution, was curtailed, which meant that they did not have access to products, and some of the other female members of their family who were sharing these products with them also were cut off. And this had certain economic ramifications of being able to pay for these products during the extended lockdown, and also it's going to take time for schools to reopen. We also started hearing stories very early on in March about women migrant workers, women on the road, and their access to any type of product, both disposable as well as reusable products. When quarantine facilities, isolation facilities, and healthcare facilities started taking in those with suspected symptoms and confirmed symptoms, we also began to realize that they didn't have access to products, access to underwear, access to water, toilet facilities. So we realized that this was a big kind of gap. Now, through the Menstrual Health Alliance India, we decided to run a very rapid survey. We literally designed the survey in just a couple of days, and we gave ourselves 3 days to roll it out using Google Forms to as many organizations as we could reach out to collect information as real time as possible on what is happening in terms of menstrual hygiene product supply chains as well as to access to information. So we primarily focused on India, but we also kind of shared the link with some global organizations working on menstrual health and hygiene that were interested in similar sets of data. So here's what we have. We had about 67 organizations participate in this rapid survey, and 45 of these organizations were from India. You can see that we have like a fairly decent mix in terms of rural and urban geographies. We had a lot of product manufacturers as well as distributors engaged in the survey. So we have those who are engaged in manufacturing disposable pads, reusable pads, and few that were engaged in menstrual cup manufacturing. Many of these organizations, about half, were involved in production, and a little more were actually involved in distribution or sales of some sort. And the majority of respondent organizations were working with communities that were either in complete lockdown or some kind of mandated social distancing, and that's more for the out of India country. So if we look at this slide, it's busy, but some important data points here that are relevant for us. So if you look at the top left-hand corner, it's the pre-lockdown distribution channels, mostly for disposable sanitary pads, for community-based distribution as well as school-based distribution. And as you can imagine, these two have taken huge hits during the lockdown period. And if you look on the right side square, 62% of organizations say that women and girls' access to sanitary products from regular channels was hugely challenging, and they were foreseeing these challenges well into the future. 22% noted that their regular beneficiaries had no access to products anymore. 52% noted that because of constrained access, there was an increased demand for products, more out of an urgency and an lack of clarity and surety whether that products would be available. 8% of our organizations said that local governments were taking only few and limited measures to facilitate access, whereas 19% believed that their local government was actually taking concrete active steps to improve access. If we come back to the left side, we looked more into production units, the organizations that were engaged in production. We looked at the units that were open, their access to and availability of raw materials to continue production, and whether they could service community demand with what they had. And if you see here, just about a quarter of production units were able to, were open, had raw materials, and were able to process community demand. So this is very, very stark for us. At Sujayji, and others had already pointed out, organizations are slowly kind of engaging in mass production. And in India, through the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, as well as through other kind of NGO efforts, there are small self-help group units that are actively engaged in either making of disposable sanitary pads or reusable cloth pads. And we noticed that several of these were actually shifting towards mask use because that was the need of the hour. But this was also affecting their ability to produce both the disposable sanitary pads as well as cloth pads. So as you see here, 18 organizations had shifted to mass production and 11 were planning to do so. It's quite stark findings. So the supply chain challenges that are highlighted. They believe that production would resume, but it's going to be a very limited capacity given social distancing norms that are critical and important. And also that workers may not necessarily come to work out of fear, or that they may have returned to their hometowns, which may be away from their production units. Mass production is taking priority and is likely to take priority for small scale manufacturers because they do have to stay in business, and this offers them a particular opportunity. Cash flow, SFG units, organizations with SFG units believe that cash flow is going to be a challenge and will continue even into the long term. And we spoke to large manufacturers like Nine, J&J, and they felt that there was going to be huge restriction on import of raw materials needed to make disposable sanitary pads, and they were actually going to become more expensive. And there are going to be restrictions on import of products such as menstrual cups, which only a few manufacturers make in India. In terms of distribution and sales, online sales had stopped for a while, although Amazon and others are slowly picking up right now. Some organizations that we spoke with said that they are using India Post, but this was extremely slow given various interstate movement restrictions. Road transport restrictions are constrained and may continue to be so. As Sujayji pointed out, sanitary pads were not considered an essential item until early April, and even then the movement of these goods has been quite slow, and the availability in various retail outlets is fairly limited. We are expecting higher transportation costs for some of these so-called non-essential items as restrictions do ease, and limited reach in communities as well. We also looked at community outreach because in addition to product related access, women and girls were also in need of information, and we'll talk a little more about that. So the top left, there's a bar chart that's showing the key hygiene messages, very much in line with what has been promoted. The key message is hand washing with soap and social distancing. And because the organizations who participated in our survey were those that worked on menstrual health and hygiene, they were trying to continue to talk about MHM as well as toilet use. But what we're seeing here is maintenance of cloth pads and use of cloth pads was getting less attention. And this is a really critical finding for us because from what we're hearing, and a lot of this is anecdotal evidence, is that in the absence of sanitary pads, sanitary pad users are shifting to kind of mixed use with cloth so that the limited supply of pads lasts longer. But these women and girls are not actually traditional cloth users, so they don't really know how to use, maintain, and hygienically kind of maintain cloth pads. We've seen that a lot of organizations are making huge efforts to retain contact with communities, but they've had to change the channels by which they speak with women and girls. So 63% are saying that they use phone, 55% are using WhatsApp groups, 29% are using community workers, and 20% are using health workers. But through these numbers, you can actually see that the gender dimensions of actually outreach do come up, because cell phone ownership amongst women and girls in India is significantly lower than cell phone ownership by men and boys. So you know that these messages may not necessarily be reaching women and girls, and also reaching women and girls in all areas. Community volunteers are doing their best, as are health workers, but then again, due to lockdown, their reach, however well-intentioned, is limited due to various safety considerations. Organizations that we spoke with are also trying different formats by which to reach communities and girls and women. They're trying to use simple IEC. They're trying to see how much they can leverage WhatsApp, especially in rural areas where connectivity is an issue. Audio messages, IVRS, posters, I mean, various things have been tried. A big issue that had been reached, that came from community feedback, was that masks, that's the homemade face covers, are using cotton cloth, and this is actually competing for the availability of cotton cloth that can be used to make safe, reusable cloth. Many organizations, because they're so heavily engaged with communities, have started engaging with relief work. 30% were working with migrants, 20% working with temporary shelters, some even working in quarantine and isolation facilities, and almost this is slightly less than half working with women and girls in urban slums. And all of them noted that the challenges with regard to menstrual health and hygiene had intensified since March, with poor access to menstrual hygiene materials, lack of water for personal hygiene, and lack of toilets that were clean, safe, and private, especially in urban slum areas. Some of the needs that they had identified, that they were trying themselves to work on, is incorporating issues related to product access and information, along with other essential services like food services, greater sharing of existing mental health and hygiene awareness materials. Some organizations had already developed these in various regional languages, but these are not being shared more widely. Guidance on how to reach particularly vulnerable groups, especially women migrants on the road. How do you reach women and girls who may be in quarantine and isolation facilities? How do we help those who are providing care in healthcare facilities? Great coordination with government to release stock of products that they may have at a state or a district or even at a block level, and engagement with large manufacturers for them to either through their CSR initiatives provide sanitary pads or make pads available at a lower cost, as Nine has done. Now, for this, what we realized is that it's important for us to go back to basics for emergency response and beyond. One is that we need to work on awareness. We need to look at how do we reach those who are most in need. And also at this time when face-to-face contact is hugely challenging, how do we communicate with girls and women menstruators in easily accessible and understandable form? In terms of access, we need to look at appropriateness of products and choice of menstrual hygiene products, and we cannot stress this enough. We heard someone, and I think the story came from Kerala, that menstrual cups someone was thinking of distributing menstrual cups to women migrants. And while the intention is actually, it comes from a very good place, giving menstrual cups to migrant women on the road where they have no privacy, no place to change, and certainly no place to insert a menstrual cup is counterintuitive. Similarly, giving sanitary pads to several adult women who typically do not use or have access to underwear also needs to be rethought. So we need to look at appropriateness and choice of menstrual hygiene products. safety and production, distribution and sales, as well as access to products during a lockdown and social distancing phase, and also kind of linking access to products and information along with essential reproductive health services, family planning services, and perhaps even services that are being offered to girls and women, those who are facing violence. In terms of use and waste management, we need to figure out, especially as we're heading into summer months with water shortages, how do we ensure that we keep some amount of water aside for personal use, safe, accessible, private sanitation, especially in urban areas, as Madhu had pointed out earlier, and how do we deal with disposal issues. Some recommendations that have come out of our survey as well as the webinar that we had to share these findings is some things on information. We need to make sure that we're able to provide information on how to maintain hygiene during periods, especially when we have restricted access to sanitation facilities, water, and hygiene products. We need information on where girls and women can access disposable as well as reusable products. Importantly, we need to get information out there on hygienic use and maintenance of reusable products such as cloth pads, whether they are the stitched cloth pads or simply using cotton cloth folded to absorb menstrual blood, as well as on essential health services. This can be linked with reproductive and family health, family planning services. In terms of communication, a lot of organizations we're very encouraged to see are experimenting with various types of digital tools to reach girls and women as well as community and communities in both urban and rural areas. Animation, celebrity videos, voice messages, IVR, digital posters, use of both community as well as FM radio. And with ease of lockdown and with frontline workers being in the community, how we leverage direct communication through our ASHAs, Anganwadi workers, ANMs, as well as SHG groups without overburdening them given the amount of work that they're undertaking related to COVID. Access to menstrual management products is important. We need to look at this both in terms of short-term and long-term. So I think Madhu pointed this out, that how can we include menstrual hygiene products along with kind of food distribution and other relief centers and the services that they are offering. Some zones, as we know, have already moved into green zones, so restrictions are less imposed there. So how can production units in these green zones be activated and supported? And how can we get raw materials to them? Cost of transportation is likely to continue to be an issue, as I said. In the long term, we need to be looking at other types of kind of raw materials that can be available to make products. And then how can SHG models, especially those that may no longer be able to undertake production, how do we get products to them and equip them to engage more in the retail distribution and sales component? And importantly, we need to look at expanding product landscape to include a mix of disposable as well as reusables, so that women do not find themselves in a precarious situation during an emergency and are more easily able to avail of alternatives when they lack access. We've found that several local administrators have been really proactive in ensuring product. While this has been very limited, we do have some good examples. So they've been able to release stock in schools, at healthcare facilities, those with ASHAs and SFGs. So how can this be done more widely across the country? Integrating some messages on wash and hygiene along with other kind of hygiene, hand washing related messages. So explore the possibility of doing this with local administration and engage more with them to see how sanitation facilities, especially shared sanitation facilities, community toilets, public toilets, can be clean, safe, and private, and bring a greater emphasis on wash facilities in quarantine, isolation, and healthcare facilities, especially for women. So yes, so I'll end here. And if you have any further questions, you can contact me or Tanya Mahajan. We both ran this survey together. So yes, we're happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Arun. Thank you very much. This was very useful. And you pointed out the challenges, that women face during this crisis in accessing the products, and how those, and especially during lockdown, how the supply chain is affected. And so it leads to problems in supplies and all that. And I think a lot of advocacy is needed around this issue of having menstrual hygiene management products availability as counted as an essential product. Once it is done, and you said that it only got recognition in April. But I think those are the things that we really need to take from your presentation and highlight. And you came up with very strong recommendations also, including having other resources available for making pads and involving SHGs in the complete value chain. So I think it's very important to look at these things and take up later for the advocacy issues. We'll come back to questions later because there are lots of people who have been asking these questions, and we'll take them in the question and answer session. We move on to our last presentation, which is made by our CPR colleagues, Bharti and Tripti. Both Bharti and Tripti have been working with our team in SAFI at CPR and have been working on issues of marginalization, gender inequality, and other vulnerabilities of sanitary workers and other marginalized communities. I would request them to make a presentation. This study that they are going to present is actually done before COVID, but explains the care economy functions of women in the communities and highlights the challenges during COVID. So I would request Tripti and Bharti to take over.
Yeah, thank you, Anju ma'am, for the introduction. A warm welcome to all the speakers and audience present. As the issue we are going to talk about has already been iterated and reiterated by a lot of speakers. And I think so I and my colleague Tripti will be talking less on that and re-emphasize on our study more. So we'll be talking on how gender inequities exist in urban wash space and it gets amplified in the pandemic situations like COVID-19. So we'll be basically sharing our insights of the gender study which we undertook and which was undertaken across 10 slums in Bhubaneswar. And the study revealed that there exists gender inequities in accessing wash services, and the same gets resonated through care economy burden women bear in fetching water, solid waste disposal, cleaning in the individual household latrines, and taking care of them. So we'll deliberate on findings, tying up gender response strategies for COVID-19. So now we have. So as we know, several problematic research studies have shared that women, though being at the center of all the programs, suffer adversely in accessing the services. This is primarily due to existing gender inequities, which differently affect women, adolescent girls, transgender men and boys in accessing wash services. Such gender inequities, when reflected in urgent health crises like COVID-19, gets further discriminatory and excluding to the women. As it has been witnessed for past 4 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has created huge health and economic shocks worldwide, with different amplifications for men and women. Also, as inferred from previous studies of emergencies such as Ebola and Zika crisis, gender inequities during disasters and pandemics often get more pronounced. So, as we know, women do bulk of unpaid care work and domestic work across the world as mothers, parents, and family members, a workload that has got intensified with the COVID-19 outbreak. The prevalent situation has forced women shoulder much of the burden, which is disproportionately high in normal times. Even experiences from Ebola and HIV crisis in developing countries have revealed that when health systems fail, it is the women who step up as unpaid home-based caregiver with devastating impacts to their health and also by bearing enormous psychological burden. So as we know, women, they make up to 70% of healthcare workforce globally, which is exposed to greater risk of infection and are mostly deprived of adequate health insurance. So it was during Ebola crisis, rate of maternal mortality spiked in West Africa. As women who rest and more deprived health cover. And even the recent UN Women Rapid Assessment Survey on socioeconomic consequence of COVID-19 on women's and men's economic empowerment echoes the above stated inequities and also shares that women are less likely to receive information than men due to difference in cell phone ownership, access to internet, and educational attainment. This makes them less informed and even less equipped to respond to such crises. Another aspect of gender inequity gets marked around menstrual hygiene management, which clearly lacks attention in such pandemic outbreaks. During lockdown, In India, adults and girls and women from migrant groups face tremendous difficulties managing periods while living in quarantine facilities. Critically, pandemic outbreaks in the informal urban settlements echo examples of gender inequities as residents rely on common public infrastructure such as common water collection points, community toilets, and public toilets for accessing wash. Such care economy work pertains to fetching water, sanitation, others, and they're mostly undertaken by women. So in such emergency times, preventive measures like social distancing becomes unfeasible in these settings. And also frequent hand washing increases water dependency, which gets further difficult in water stressed sites. So these efforts of social distancing and hand washing have found to amplify the work burden of women manifold. Such outbreaks divert resources away from services that women need, even as their burden of care increases and access to wash becomes a concern. So now, having said that, having given the background, now I would request my colleague Tripti to take us through the gender study and share how COVID-19 can further deepen the gender inequities in the wash space.
Hi, thanks, Bharti. So, just to contextualize, now I will draw from field research
Please
findings.
speak louder, please. Speak louder.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yeah, now, yeah.
Okay. So, to contextualize, taking forward, I will draw on research findings from our primary research that was carried in 2018-19. Although this was pre-COVID, but it shows gender disparities in the wash sector, which are also more relevant today because these vulnerabilities going forward are only likely to get more amplified during COVID. So the study was rolled out in 10 settlements and 550 households were interviewed and 65% of the respondents were women. So although there's a high reliance on individual household latrines, that is 68% household rely on toilets, but there is also reliance on community toilets and ODs that took place. In the community toilets and public toilets, some of the difficulties that women and transgender reported were as follows. So men enter women's toilets. So this was one of the main critical issues that was reported. Male caretakers were assigned for women's toilet, no adequate facility to manage MHM safely, as even Arundhati has illustrated through her presentation. For transgender, there were no separate wing or cubicle for specifically for them. So the built environment of the community toilet and public toilet itself denies the existence of transgender, and it forces them to choose between men and women's room or bathrooms. So this creates insecurities amongst them and makes their position even more vulnerable. So there were some anecdotes that transgender community had shared, that people throw stones at them, stare at them, abuse, make lewd comments, and sneer at them. They are curious about their bodies and they stare. Passers-by make dirty moves on us. Sometimes they ask us to show body parts. So these were some anecdotal evidence also that we have captured. So given the current context that there is a need to practice social distancing, and also there is difficulty in using community toilets and public toilets, so that is why there is more need to push for individual household latrines. Wherever community toilets are not, they're there because of space constraint, they have to be managed better. Survey findings reveal that certain factors trigger toilet construction, one of them being piped water supply. So here we see in this bar graph, if there is a high water supply, then the individual household latrines are more likely to be constructed. And same is the case with OD. So if there is low water, then the communities are more likely to go for open defecation. While for community toilet reliance, if the water supply is inconsistent, then they are likely to go for community toilets. If we look at the role of women in the care economy, we see that they are disproportionately burdened. And this was something even Kathleen pointed out through her presentation. When we asked respondents who was responsible for individual household latrine cleaning in their houses, 68% said that women members were responsible. And even for solid waste, there was a high reliance on women for solid waste disposal. And for taking care of the ill, as others have also pointed out, a large proportion of burden falls on women. and also for fetching water. So while women have a large burden in care roles, they do not have similar, but when it comes to participation, their active participation is missing. So we had also asked our respondents on what was their participation uh, in discussion during SBM consultation. So about 58% male said that they had gone from their households, while only 32% women said that they had participated in these consultations. So we see that despite the recent large-scale IHHL construction, there continue to be low access on sanitation infrastructure, and also on IHHL, there is a need to push for public toilet, and there's a need to push for IHHL instead of community toilets. Women reported care burden to be high and poor attention to MHM as critical issues. Transgender lack access to community toilets due to appropriate design features. Enabling mechanism for gender-friendly sanitation infrastructure and sanitation services are required for women. Safe MHM facilities are needed. Women caretakers for a women's wing and separate entry for them. Transgender also need separate and specific toilets for them, and equitable user fee for CDs. So now Bharti will also take forward and discuss the recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Tripti, for sharing insights from the study and the relevance it holds in the emergency situation like COVID-19. So building on to what Tripti has just shared, I would like to reemphasize on the following as the possible set of recommendations to bridge the gender inequities in wash space. So first and foremost, in the emergency situation like COVID-19, there is need for a policy response, which should be immediate and prioritize women's concern in totality. Given that such disease outbreaks deepen gender inequities, there is need to develop gender responsive strategies to strengthen public health preparedness and response measures. So such a strategy would aim to address specific needs of women, their responsibilities and perspectives, which would further answer questions to the inclusion and equity in WASH. The strategy would broadly talk about reducing WASH-related burden by pushing IHHL and access to water to all, dividing share of care economy burden by all household members, informing women on outbreaks and response measures through distinctive communication tools like text messaging via mobile phones, community radios, TV programs, mobilization of community leaders and influencers, and door-to-door outreach, and also improving access to MHM products and the strengthening emergency responses and CTPTs as to accommodate anyone during the quarantine period. So such CTPTs need to also have gender inclusive features like MHM integrated well within the vicinity. Further, the strategy would call for a separate gender budget and also talk about the last slide, the previous one. Yeah.
Previous.
Yes. So further, the strategy would call for separate gender budget and also talk about capacity building of local government to effectively respond to such crises. Then coming to the planning aspects, they definitely need to capture the gender disaggregated data, which has been shared by all in this space, in the light of WASH in COVID-19 and understand its impact on care economy, health and economic well-being. This GDD analysis would inform policy responses, which would eventually feed into building resilience, women's resilience component in situations like COVID-19. There's also need to further impress on participatory planning involving all key stakeholders and also involving women as providers of services and products in the WASH value chain so that women's needs and realities don't fall through the cracks. Next slide. Then going ahead, there should be periodic assessment of WASH public infrastructure, including CTPT's common water source, in order to assess the availability and accessibility of WASH to one and all, especially in such crises. Following this, it would be also pertinent to undertake.
Sorry.
Following this, it's okay. Following this, it would be pertinent to undertake gender analysis at regular intervals as it would stand very critical in developing a resilient strategy to mitigate the social and economic impacts of COVID-19. And the last is the role of CBOs, women groups, and elected representatives stands very critical in initiating such responses. Meaningful engagement with such communities, CBOs, women groups, and ERs would be initiated to advance women's voice and decision making in WASH. Even crisis management programs for local communities, in coordination with elected representatives, would be institutionalized, covering the aspects around social, psychological, economic, and health aspects around those. This would be further complemented with formation of gender forums as a social support platform at different levels. And there's also need to strengthen the grievance redressal mechanism to address gender-related concerns. Thus, overall, it becomes very pertinent to integrate gender in national and subnational COVID response plans, not only to achieve better outcomes for women and girls, but to achieve better outcomes for all. With this, we end our presentation, and we'll be happy to hear your comments, suggestions, and we'll be happy to take your questions too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tripti and Bharti. You made very important points, and from Alliance, we have been highlighting the importance of individual household toilets and why should they be built. And during the period of lockdown, where there are problems of community toilets and public toilets access to everybody, and also the kind of and the virus that spreads because of the use of community toilet and public toilet due to problems in maintaining the social distance. So it also calls for having individual toilets and better water connections, so that not only those wash services are utilized effectively by everybody, including women, and the care burden also lessens to an extent. Thank you very much. And this presentation, as well as other presentations, have highlighted the importance of community-based groups and organizations, and also ULB's response and the role of elected representatives, especially women elected representatives, in mitigating the challenges of COVID-19 or any kind of pandemic that hits the communities the hardest. So thank you everybody for your participation and for being the speakers. I thank all of you who provided useful insights. Now we'll open up the question and answer session for at least 20 minutes or so. I know the time is up, but we can, for 15-20 minutes, we can take some questions. There are certain questions already listed in the chat. So I would ask my colleague Anindita to briefly, summarize what has come in the chat, so for the speakers. And also we are going to open up, so please raise your hands so that we'll unmute and then take your questions if you have any pertinent questions for the speakers. Thank you. We'll start then. Yeah,
We have quite a number of questions that has come in the chat box, and anyone who is having any burning, you can raise your hand. So I can see Shashwat Nayak has raised his hand for asking question. Anju, you want to take that question first and then go to the chat box questions?
Okay, I'm not able to see at the moment. Let me see, but you can start. I mean, if you're seeing, you can just say the question. I'm just...
Okay. No, so Shashwat, you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, so you unmute Shashwat. I would request host to unmute Shashwat.
I have been unmuted. That's so nice of you, ma'am. It's certainly, it's okay if you can answer me, but my question was primarily towards Sujay Majumdar, sir. As I have recently come across a compendium developed by him along with Mr. Pankaj Mathur on hand washing with soap. That the document is about, compendium of indicative layouts, designs, and cost estimates, that came in April 2020. In lieu of that, my question would be, what gender-specific limitations, challenges, or need do you see, sir or ma'am, especially for women related to hand washing in public areas in this COVID situation?
Thank you, Shashwat. Shujoy, we'll take a few more and then you answer.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Medu, you want to go ahead?
I must thank Sujay Majumdar sir for bringing us this need of the art document.
Thank you, Shashwat. Medu, you want to go ahead and ask?
The participants, from say Gates Foundation, UNICEF and WaterAid, how they are open to innovations, because a lot of them pointed out the need for innovation. So what are some platforms or what are some ways in which they're open to innovations? What kind of innovations are they open to, ranging from say qualitative studies to quick interventions, like how from BMGF ma'am had mentioned that solutions like tippy tap kind of solutions. So what are some ways of collaboration with the larger community or corporate sector that they're open to innovations with?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just intervene, Anju. Madhu has to leave. Madhu, you would like to take this question, and
Yeah.
so there were in the chat box a few comments, questions, like, somebody was asking, is it possible, why the reason why urban poor fall between the cracks remains unvisible if there are informal labor. So if there are circular migrants, urban administrative bodies ignore them. Should a starting point be more inclusive data gathering?
Okay, so I'll take both these questions. Sorry, I apologize to everyone, but I have a prior commitment. And as you can imagine, in COVID-related times, we are on call for a lot of things. The reason, so I'll take the first question on innovation and platform. So as a foundation, actually, we are grant makers. So we have a lot of grants that we have out working with our different focus states, as well as with the National Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So whatever we do is obviously in partnership with the government, but the innovative platforms are all within our partner network. We have what is called the National Fecal Sludge and Septage Management Alliance, which is really a broad alliance looking at urban sanitation more holistically that Anju referred to. So that is one platform where we have most of our technical partners. We have a technology task force within that, where we look at all of the innovations that are coming, needed, assess them, and then we recommend them to our various government partners. So that's one platform. If anybody comes up with something unique, for instance, we ran a small thing on personal protective equipment. We write the guidelines, and then we look for the vendors and then suggest them to the state governments and national governments that we work with. So that's one platform that we definitely have for innovation. In terms of data gathering, we absolutely think that there is need to do much more on inclusive data gathering, and especially gendered data gathering, which I referred to in my conversation. One of the things that the foundation is doing now is actually developing an equity dashboard, right, to see not only is everyone being addressed, but specifically focusing on how sanitation services to begin with are reaching the urban poor. So we are in the process of developing that kind of equity dashboard, which we believe will help countries report back on actually how they're addressing the needs of the urban poor. So yes, they do fall in the gap. And of course, within the COVID, it is very, the most critical issue is how to make visible the urban poor, and not only urban poor, rural poor as well, the ultra poor. One of the things we heard yesterday in a presentation on UP Bihar and relief measures is that a significant amount of the poor are not registered. So even if you have all these schemes, relief schemes, they are not able to access it because they're not registered. And this problem is hugely magnified when you talk about the urban poor. Who is the urban poor? Where are they? They are so dynamic. They come in, out. There's no way to register them. And so that is a big effort. And at least at the foundation, we are really pushing our partners and our governments to see how best we can create a synthesized database to know where are the poor, and then what are the ways in which you can register them, provide them the entitlements. One strong platform is the National Urban Livelihood Mission, which of course we are also supporting with the project management unit. And the big effort there is to do this. And I have to say, I'm really happy that the government is super focused on registering the poor, providing rations, providing relief to them with or without registration, taking any list that any CVO currently is providing them and actually taking that as validation. So I'll stop there. And thank you. Thanks, CPR. Yeah, I'm leaving.
Thank you, Madhu. Thanks so much for your participation. Okay, so Madhu has to leave. We can move to Sujoy. He has to answer one or two queries raised by people.
Shuja, I have a few more for you. You want to take the two and then take a few more? Shujoy and Arundhati both have the maximum share of the question. So,
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead and mention them.
So someone was asking, my question is how and what kind of wash structures, especially low cost, are that we can promote in response of the pandemic? This one of our colleagues working in South Rajasthan was asking. And also your view on impact on local women labor after returning most of male migrants to their native places.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting question, last one especially. I just read in the newspaper today, I'm sure all of you must have read, is that the Karnataka government has decided to stop the requests for trains for people to go back home. Because apparently the construction industry met the CM yesterday and requested that if everybody goes back home, our industry will not be able to restart. So they decided to cancel the trains. Now, I was having a discussion with this in my home. This is just like kidnapping people. I mean, you're forcing people to stay back and work for you because, so I'm not going to that. But the first couple of questions. Number one, the hand washing station booklet. Yes, UNICEF had brought out this booklet last month. The idea actually was that, so as you know, one of the only ways to stop the spread of the virus is by frequent hand washing with soap. Now to do that, how do you do that unless you have hand washing stations in place? So we tried, and because the complete manufacturing and transport was stopped, the current manufacturers of hand washing stations, first of all, did not have adequate number of products, did not have low cost products, and how do you, so whatever they had, how do you transport them? So the idea was to bring out a booklet with easy designs, around 6 or 7 designs, which people could really make at the local level. I mean, easily manufactured. And so, and the cost was between 3,000 and around 15,000. There were around 6-7 models and many kinds of water conservation, and they're all operated by feet. I mean, it was hands-free kind of thing. So that was the book which I think Shashwat was mentioning. Whether it was a specific for gender, when we made that book, we did not look at it on that way. It was for everybody. But now I can look at this question about if you set it up in public places or set it up, you know, in places in front of the panchayat office or in schools or in markets. More than desegregation of gender, maybe you need more so that people can access easily without creating a crowd. You could have girls boys differentiation. You might need to put up hand washing stations near girls latrines and girls toilets. So those kind of issues will need to be looked at. I don't see any need of any design change, but I think the issue of access will need to be looked at, and basically adequacy. One of the issues I think we really need to look at in schools across India, we say we have adequate facilities for girls and boys separately. But I don't think the government or anybody else has really looked at adequacy. You have 500 children in a school and you have only a couple of toilets. So that is a disaster. So I think with this, now that we are in such a situation, this question of adequacy will need to be looked at very, extremely seriously. The third question you asked was low cost production. I think I've answered that. We do have a booklet, and you can really make a hand washing station, very simple one, which is durable, starting from around 4,000 rupees. So it's there in the book. I can share the link with CPR. Thank you. And I think I have shared the link with you.
Yeah, I think we have. Thank you, Shujoy. So Arundhati, there are a few questions for you. Some insights, if you can add on, is that you spoke about MHM facilities for the vulnerable. So there were questions on what about MHM facilities in the quarantine centers that we have right now set up at various parts of the country, and also for specially abled women, how are you their MHM requirements, how do you think that is there any best practices in this time of pandemic, how they're reached? And And also there is a question of, you know, someone said that our survey in Orissa says the last distribution of menstrual products took place in January. And by 2 weeks of lockdown towards the end of March, they did not have any product distribution from them yet, next round. So what is your comment on that?
Thanks, Anandita. So with regard to MHM and quarantine facilities and even healthcare facilities, we actually don't have too many insights because we simply lack data on how many girls and women are in these facilities. However, our conversations with like WaterAid's own project teams as well as others, we feel that number one is that quarantine facilities, isolation facilities, healthcare facilities need to have at the very minimal one clean, safe, private toilet with access to water that can be for women as well as women workers in these quarantine facilities, so whether it's a nurse or an A&M, female doctors, etc. So both for those who are in quarantine or those who are patients, as well as all kinds of care providers and healthcare providers. So at the very minimal, ensure that there is a toilet facility that's safe, clean, private with water. Secondly is that it's absolutely essential, since a quarantine facility will have people for any period between 14 to 21 days, that you have access to a stock of sanitary pads that are available at that facility. If I really think it's important that along with sanitary pads, you also keep a stock of underwear, because sometimes women, many adult women in several parts of the country do not regularly use underwear. So I think that it's important to have those two. Given that cotton cloth is being made available to make these face covers, some cotton cloth, clean cotton cloth, needs to be kept aside for use for women, especially if they are cloth users. And organizations such as Jatan Sansthan, Ecofem are providing easy open source kind of information and support on how to make these pads. So I think that's critical. In quarantine facilities, if possible, there's a lot of, there's some organizations that do have quick, easy information on how to maintain hygiene during periods, how to use cloth pads, how to wash, dry and store them. So if possible, to have that material available. And if there is a female, girl, woman who is coming into the facility, make sure that she has access to that information. It can even just be a printed leaflet in Hindi or a regional language. These are some steps that can be taken. To the question of, sorry, the one more thing that I want to say in the quarantine isolation healthcare facilities is also for care providers. We've been hearing some pretty horrific stories of nurses pulling in very long hour shifts and having to stay in these really crowded hostel type accommodations because they're not able to go back to their families, not having water to bathe and change their clothes. I mean, if we expect our care providers to really put in these long hours, serve people who are either suspected, diagnosed, or provide their regular health services, it's absolutely essential that we give them that much dignity to have access to sufficient menstrual hygiene material so that they can continue to do the kind of life-saving work that they are. So this is another point. They're also, in our opinion, an important vulnerable group. For disabled women, to be honest, I haven't heard anything that is extraordinary that is being done during this particular this time. I think we've across the world we've struggled as to what to do with women and girls with various types of disabilities, including physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, or cognitive impairments, to help them with this. There have been some materials that have been developed by WSSCC to provide information using Braille as well as sign language on menstrual hygiene in general. There's been a great intervention that's been piloted in Nepal on girls with intellectual disabilities and how do you provide them information on menstruation and how do you equip them to deal with it. I think that at this time, to make sure that if there are girls and women with any kind of disability impairment at home, as well as in other types of institutional facilities, is to make sure that they have access at least to safe, clean absorbent that they can change, access to water and sanitation facilities to aid hygienic behavior, and have a caregiver who is able to assist them in these tasks. Yes, much more is required, but I think at this time, we're not sure. We don't know enough about what their needs are, so we want to ensure at least that the basic minimum is done. In terms of areas where products were available and is no longer available, this is indeed a difficult situation. We've heard, we know of several ways by which this is being tackled. So, for example, if there is a local organization, local government, then they can be contacted. They can reach out to district collectors who sometimes do know where stock is lying in SFG production unit. A lot of district collectors, I've heard, even in places like Orissa, have some kind of tie-up with sanitary pad manufacturers, as well as those organizations and companies that are importing these products and have them in go-downs or in storage units. So it's important to kind of reach out to government at various levels to see that if they have stock of sanitary pads, how can they release it? We also know that several self-help or decentralized production units have stock that is just lying there, unused. This may not be the best sanitary pad that you can use, but at this time when people really lack access, then how can we get that stock moving? The other thing is, in the absence of disposable sanitary pads, reusable cloth pads is an option. However, we have to make sure that this is used safely, hygienically, and maintained well. So get information out there. Again, Jatan Sansthan of Ugair Pads has developed good resources on how to make homemade cloth pads, how to wash them properly, how to dry them, and to store them. So in the absence of one type of product, we will have to shift gears to mix use other reusable cloth pads, but make sure that information reaches.
Right. Thank you so much, Arundhati. That was very insightful. I'll request Anju to take over.
Yeah.
I think we're run out of time.
Yeah, so we are running out of time. So thanks everybody for your participation. We have taken some questions here and I'm seeing in the chat, which we'll try to respond to you after this webinar, getting across to the speakers. So they're very pertinent issues. And in the end, before thanking you all once again, I would just like to inform you that we have recorded the webinar. And this recording, as well as the short summary of the webinar, will be available to all of you through our link. We will be sharing the link that will be uploaded on CPR's website also, and we'll share the link. And I hope that you'll be able to get the recording and the summary of the notes, summary of the webinar on that. Thanks very much, everybody, for your participation. Thanks again to the speakers. Thanks for joining us. Thanks all the CPR colleagues for putting this together. Thank you very much.